For 2 decades, Gunsmoke was a fixture in American living rooms, and James Arness became inseparable from the lawman he portrayed, Marshal Matt Dillon. Week after week, audiences followed his steady hand and quiet strength as he tried to bring order to Dodge City. Alongside him was Amanda Blake as Miss Kitty Russell, a character whose bond with Dillon became one of television's most enduring, unresolved romances. But behind the curtain of this legendary show, not everything was as harmonious as it seemed. While their chemistry on screen looked effortless, in reality, the partnership between Arness and his leading lady was far more complicated, marked by tension that lasted nearly 20 years. The rise of Gunsmoke and the casting of James Arness. When Gunsmoke made the leap from radio to television in 1955, CBS knew they needed more than just a strong script to capture audiences. They needed a face and a presence that could embody the frontier lawman. On radio, William Conrad's voice had defined Marshal Matt Dillon, but producers felt he lacked the physical look for television. Hollywood's biggest star, John Wayne, was first approached for the role. He declined, but in a move that changed television history, Wayne personally recommended his friend James Arness. To help launch the series, Wayne even appeared in a filmed introduction, lending his name and reputation to give Gunsmoke an edge. At just 32 years old, Arness carried both the stature and the scars of real battle. Standing an imposing 6'7", he had served in World War II, where he was gravely injured at Anzio in 1944. His wounds left him with permanent damage to his foot and leg, a burden he carried for the rest of his life. Yet his stoic presence, shaped by combat and recovery, gave him the authentic grit that producers wanted. He wasn't just playing a Western hero. He lived with the kind of pain and endurance that mirrored Dillon's struggles on the dusty streets of Dodge City. The gamble paid off immediately. Within months of its premiere, Gunsmoke became a national sensation. Families tuned in weekly, and James Arness became a household name. For him, the role was both a blessing and a cage. He found himself tied to Dillon for the next 20 years. Alongside him were Milburn Stone as Doc Adams, Dennis Weaver as Chester, later replaced by Ken Curtis as Festus, and Amanda Blake as Miss Kitty Russell. On screen, this cast fit together seamlessly, creating the illusion of a family that viewers welcomed into their homes. But behind the set walls, cracks were already forming, particularly in the relationship between Arness and Blake. Their bond, essential to the heart of the show, was also the one most strained. Amanda Blake and the birth of Miss Kitty. When Amanda Blake first stepped into the role of Miss Kitty Russell in 1955, she was in her mid-20s and eager to prove herself. Born Beverly Louise Neal in Buffalo, New York, she had taken the stage name Amanda Blake after MGM began grooming her as a young starlet. Before Gunsmoke, she had played supporting roles in films and television, but Miss Kitty became the defining character of her career. At the Long Branch Saloon, she wasn't just serving drinks. She was Dodge City's voice of charm, resilience, and authority. What many viewers didn't realize was that Kitty's character had been softened for television. In the radio version, she was openly portrayed as a madam, a detail that could not pass network censors in the 1950s. On screen, she became a businesswoman, respected but still enigmatic, with an air of sophistication that hinted at her past without spelling it out. Blake brought wit and warmth to the role, making Kitty one of the most beloved women on television. By the time the show switched to color in 1966, her fiery red hair and striking presence gave her even greater visibility, turning her into an icon of Western television. The dynamic between Kitty and Marshal Dillon became one of the great unresolved romances of television history. Week after week, fans tuned in to watch the subtle glances, the teasing banter, and the quiet tenderness between them. Many wondered why the show never allowed them to marry or even share an on-screen kiss. In interviews, James Arness later admitted the decision was deliberate. The producers felt that once the relationship became official, the chemistry would fade and the show would lose its balance between law, danger, and subtle romance. Leaving their bond undefined gave audiences room to imagine what happened when the Long Branch's doors finally closed at night. But while their characters suggested an unspoken intimacy, the truth behind the cameras was starkly different. Amanda Blake and James Arness were not close friends, and their working relationship grew increasingly strained over the years. What looked like love on screen was, in reality, held together only by their professionalism and shared duty to the success of Gunsmoke. The roots of the tension between Arness and Blake. For nearly 20 years, James Arness and Amanda Blake stood side by side as the heart of Gunsmoke. Yet despite what audiences believed, the relationship between the two actors was marked by conflict. While their characters built a slow-burn affection, the actors themselves often clashed in ways that only insiders witnessed. The earliest friction came from creative disagreements. As the show grew in popularity through the 1960s, Arness gained more control over its direction. He had approval power over scripts, casting, and the overall tone of the series. Arness wanted the romance between Matt and Kitty to remain subtle, a hint of tenderness rather than a full-fledged love story. Blake, on the other hand, believed Kitty deserved more explicit depth. She argued that audiences wanted to see the couple's bond grow into something tangible, a storyline that could reflect Kitty's strength and independence. Their opposing views frequently led to standoffs, leaving directors caught in the middle. Personality differences only widened the divide. Off-screen, Arness was private and reserved, often retreating to his dressing room between takes. He avoided small talk and valued distance. Blake, by contrast, was outgoing and social. She enjoyed being on set, chatting with crew members, and hosting gatherings for the cast. Her energy clashed with Arness's quiet demeanor, and over the years, these differences hardened into resentment. Another source of tension was the shifting balance of fame. While Arness remained the central figure of Gunsmoke, Kitty's role steadily expanded. Female viewers admired her independence in a genre dominated by male heroes, and the media spotlight often highlighted Blake's contribution to the show's success. Some crew members later suggested that Arness felt threatened by the attention she received, worried that Kitty's growing popularity could overshadow Dylan. The more Miss Kitty became a symbol in her own right, the more Arness tightened his control over how the relationship was portrayed. On top of this, the grueling production schedule placed everyone under pressure. At the show's peak, up to 40 episodes were filmed each season, far more than modern standards. For Arness, still coping with chronic pain from his war injuries, the stress was immense. Long hours and physical discomfort left him irritable, especially during scenes requiring close emotional interaction with Blake. Their on-screen intimacy, so central to the show, became the hardest for them to perform off-camera. By the late 1960s, insiders recalled Arness privately admitting that he wished Amanda Blake would leave the series. Yet, they both continued working together, held by contract obligations and the knowledge that Gunsmoke depended on their professional cooperation. The silent war behind the scenes, and Blake's departure. By the time Gunsmoke entered its final decade, the divide between James Arness and Amanda Blake had become an open secret among the cast and crew, even if it remained invisible to the audience. On camera, they continued to deliver subtle, heartfelt performances that suggested affection and loyalty. But once the director called cut, the tension often returned. Arness was known to avoid unnecessary interaction with Blake, while she in turn grew frustrated with his reserved and sometimes dismissive behavior. The physical toll on Arness only worsened matters. His World War II injuries, damaged feet, knees, and lingering arthritis left him in constant discomfort. To accommodate his pain, producers rearranged filming schedules so that his most physically demanding scenes were shot early in the day before exhaustion set in. While the crew accepted this as necessary, it created complications for everyone else, including Blake, who sometimes had to adjust her own performances around his limitations. She was outspoken about her frustrations, which often put her at odds with Arness's guarded approach. Another sore point emerged over the portrayal of Miss Kitty herself. Blake wanted Kitty to evolve with the times, to be more than just a saloon owner left waiting for Dylan's attention. She pressed for updated costumes, more dynamic storylines, and a stronger voice in her character's future. By the early 1970s, she openly clashed with producer John Mantley, particularly about Kitty's wardrobe. Blake felt it had grown outdated and unflattering, while Mantley resisted setting aside new budget for her costumes. His refusal, she later said, was the biggest mistake he ever made, because it convinced her she had reached the end of the road. In 1974, after 19 seasons, Amanda Blake chose to leave Gunsmoke. The official explanation was that Kitty left Dodge City to start a new life in New Orleans, but fans immediately felt the void. For Arness, her departure may have been a quiet relief, though he never spoke publicly about it. For Blake, it was a bittersweet end to a role that had defined nearly 2 decades of her life. Despite the private battles, she had built a beloved character who resonated deeply with audiences. Without Kitty, Gunsmoke entered its final season missing one of its most essential voices. Life after Gunsmoke: the tragedy and legacy of Amanda Blake. After leaving Gunsmoke in 1974, Amanda Blake sought to reclaim her life outside Dodge City. She returned occasionally to television with guest appearances on shows like The Love Boat, Match Game, and Tattletales, but she never found another role as defining as Miss Kitty. For nearly 20 years, she had been the fiery redhead of Dodge, and audiences struggled to see her as anyone else. Privately, Blake's life was marked by instability. She had been married and divorced multiple times during her Gunsmoke years, often saying that the show gave her more stability than her personal relationships ever did. After her departure, she remarried, but even that union ended in the early 1980s. With Hollywood offering fewer roles, Blake shifted her energy toward a cause that mattered deeply to her: animal welfare. She became a dedicated advocate, working with organizations like the Arizona Animal Welfare League and the Performing Animal Welfare Society. She championed the rescue of big cats, helped create one of the first successful cheetah breeding programs in captivity, and spent much of her later life raising awareness about protecting endangered species. For Blake, this work was more fulfilling than the fleeting glamour of Hollywood. But tragedy struck in the late 1980s. Blake was diagnosed with oral cancer, a battle she fought quietly while continuing her charity efforts. On August 16, 1989, she died in Sacramento at the age of 60. It was later revealed that complications from AIDS played a role in her passing, a fact that stunned fans and colleagues who had known her only as Miss Kitty. The news cast a shadow over her legacy, but it also underscored the private burdens she carried away from the public eye. James Arness, characteristically reserved, said little about her death, though those close to him noted that he felt the loss deeply. Despite their differences, Blake had been his partner on screen for nearly 2 decades, and their shared history could not be erased. For fans, her absence was permanent. The dream of ever seeing Dylan and Kitty reunited in a meaningful way vanished with her passing. James Arness's final years and the truth about their relationship. When Gunsmoke ended in 1975 after 20 seasons, James Arness faced the challenge of stepping out from behind Marshal Matt Dillon's badge. He continued working steadily, starring in the miniseries How the West Was Won from 1976 to 1979, and later in the police drama McLean's Law in the early 1980s. He also reprised his role in 5 Gunsmoke TV movies between 1987 and 1994, keeping the legacy alive for longtime fans. Yet, in his later years, Arness became increasingly reclusive. He preferred the quiet of sailing and surfing along the California coast to the spotlight of Hollywood, rarely giving interviews and almost never discussing the conflicts that had once consumed his working life. When asked about the unresolved romance between Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty, Arness finally shed some light. In his autobiography, he explained that the producers feared giving the relationship a definitive outcome. If Dillon and Kitty were allowed to marry or show physical intimacy, the very fabric of Gunsmoke would change. The show was built on law, conflict, and the tension of the frontier, not domestic life. By keeping their bond ambiguous, the writers left audiences yearning, and that yearning kept them tuning in week after week. Arness admitted that fans often pressed him about why he and Blake's characters never became a couple, but he stood by the decision, insisting it was the right choice for the series. Behind that defense, however, lay the personal truth. His relationship with Amanda Blake had never been easy. While he acknowledged her talent and her importance to the success of Gunsmoke, he rarely elaborated on their off-screen struggles. Privately, colleagues knew he had wished for her departure long before she left, but his professionalism ensured that the public never saw it. Even after her passing in 1989, Arness chose to honor her memory with quiet respect, speaking only of her contributions to the show. James Arness died at his home in Brentwood, California, on June 3, 2011, at the age of 88. His passing closed the final chapter on one of television's greatest legends, and yet, the complicated partnership between him and Amanda Blake remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the Gunsmoke story. For 20 years, two actors who often struggled to tolerate each other created one of television's most enduring love stories, a reminder that sometimes the greatest performances are born not from harmony, but from tension. For 2 decades, James Arness and Amanda Blake gave audiences a romance that never truly existed beyond the screen. Their partnership was complicated, their off-camera relationship filled with tension, yet together they created one of television's most unforgettable bonds. It's a reminder that sometimes the hardest collaborations produce the most lasting art. What do you think? Should Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty have ended up together on Gunsmoke? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from Hollywood's hidden past.